Hey everybody, I'm Echo33 and I'm a generative artist. Welcome to Send It, this crazy podcast where we go deep into the intersection of art and technology.
We're bringing you stories with artists, curators, tech founders, and visionaries.
Hello Ciphrd, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I want to go straight into the interview. So obviously you are the founder of Fxhash, and I always remember the very early days we were chatting on Twitter, and you were telling me that you had a broken hand and you were building this platform. I mean, it was completely insane. Could you tell us a bit more about this story?
Yeah, I mean, back in 2021, so I was doing web development as a career and doing generative art as a hobby on the side. But I was investing a lot of time in this hobby. So I was on one hand doing a lot of installations, physical installations at festivals. So nothing really serious in terms of money, in terms of career, but really trying to explore what can be done in the physical spaces with digital art. And yeah, I came across art blocks and found the concept really fascinating. At the time then, and I had already explored on Foundation a piece that was close to what art blocks was doing essentially. So it was called Infiguro, and people would just buy a video, but then I would send them a unique NFT that was based on the hash of the transaction with the same algorithm. So it was essentially the same principles to some extent. So yeah, when Artblocks released, I was really thrilled by it and wanted really something there, but of course it was curated and I had some struggles with curation processes then. It was something I was struggling to go through all the time and was more of an internet, free internet for everyone kind of person. So I thought, let's try building something for me to enjoy and be able to publish, but also maybe for others to do. And that's when I coincidentally broke my hand. Well, not kind of broke, but teared the muscles in my hand. So I was one-handed then, and so yeah, funnily took me about a month and a half to build FX, and this was during it was one-handed at the time. But yeah, it wasn't too much of an issue, except when the platform started to boom, sort of, because then we'd had, of course, tens of issues every day. And so I was there, struggling to fix everything really quickly, which is very hard with one hand. I recommend experiencing life without an arm. It's surprisingly difficult.
Especially when vibe coding is not a thing and you cannot...
Yeah, I don't know if it's still a thing yet, but yeah.
So, did I understand that correctly, that actually your Genesis work is on Foundation?
Yeah, so it's on a wallet that I have lost now.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had the wallet on a Linux computer that I needed to format to do some testing for hotfixing Fxhash on a test environment. And I was contemplating the idea of wiping the key or making a serious backup, and I thought nobody's gonna find it. And then just Bolly's Life heard about it somewhere and found it and collected it. And so yeah, it's on the Lost Ciphrd wallet on Foundation.
Wow, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's...
And could you tell us a little bit more about your view about curation? Because I remember in the Fxhash Discord, for me it was a very interesting point that you didn't want to have a closed curation. It's free and open to every artist. Is it still the case? And why do you think this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up mostly on the internet more than I did in real life. Well, I did grow in real life, of course, but I mean, I would say a good part of my intellectual growth happened on the internet, through video game mod development, to web dev back then when I started learning coding with some open tutorials on the French platform Site du Zéro, which is now Open Classrooms. The French listeners it will ring a bell for them. And so, for me, there's always been this open and accessible culture that helped me grow and discover so many things that make me what I am today. But also, these are like my deepest interest in life. Coding and like exploring computer systems is what I love doing. So it's always been natural for me to build tools that are open to everyone in some way, because this is how I experienced internet and how I want others to experience it, essentially.
Governance at the art platform level. If we think about governance at the blockchain level, I'm quite sure that you didn't choose Tezos randomly. And I know that Tezos is very well known for this kind of unique governance protocol. Is there a way for you to explain in some kind of layman terms why Tezos is unique from a governance standpoint?
Yes, of course. So everyone that holds Tezos, so the native blockchain, the token native to the Tezos blockchain, can essentially participate in a vote made by essentially like people developing Tezos, so funded by the Tezos Foundation. And so they make proposals on this is what we want the protocol to become, essentially. And people will say yes or no, and yeah, depending on these, they implement some of it, and then it gets through some review process. But in a way, everyone has the ability to weigh in on the future of the chain itself.
Great. Okay. So yeah, what you built is definitely on a solid foundation, because from like a governance standpoint and a curation standpoint, you kind of keep this openness, where on Fxhash, I would say maybe people show their appreciation by sharing the works or purchasing the works. Whereas on the Tezos blockchain, I assume it's the ones who gets the most votes who can get like the proposal agreed at the protocol level.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was much more idealistic when I created FX. And so for me, Tezos was like the best choice given the existing community, the blockchain fundamentals. I've now grown a little bit in realizing that there is a duality between ideals and running a company, like having money to sustain a product, to sustain tools for users to keep enjoying, like. And so we had to take some decisions that drew us like not exactly where our the initial ideals of the platform were placed, but where we think it's the closest like compromise we can make, so that we can financially sustain the ecosystem on the long term, while carrying this initial vision of being open for everyone and being a place for artists to start being discovered, start making a living.
So maybe we'll get back to this in a little while, because I assume here you're speaking about the transitioning from Tezos to the base blockchain, which was announced a few days ago. I think it's quite challenging for a lot of artists to understand how difficult it can be to run a platform like an art marketplace, if you will. And I would love to learn a little bit more about some of the challenges you faced, because I remember when it was like the craziness of 2020. I mean, there were so many projects being released. I remember looking at the Fxhash, because when was the like first release of FX?
Somewhere in October 2021.
Okay, yeah,
Was
so
November. Well, around then.
And I remember like the page, you had like so many new projects being released every day. And I mean, from a curation standpoint, from a security standpoint, a security as in, oh, I've been copy minted by someone else. And how did you approach this from like this ideal of openness, decentralization, open curation, to having life like punching you in the face with like so many challenges to fix?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, like, there is this big tension between art and finance in the art NFTs fields, right? In our ecosystem, there is, on one end, the being true to the art, and on the other, well, there is still money involved, there's still people spending money, so we have to protect them. And so we've dealt essentially on a case by case. As I said, when I built the platform, I had no idea it would become even like remotely big, like I thought maybe a few artists will publish. So there was no like moderation system in place. There was no way for us to protect essentially customers from minting some copy mint, for instance. So when the first copy mint happened, and I think it was a piece from Peter Plasma. So Peter Plasma is the Dutch artist, and the first copy mint we got was from Plasma Peter. And people bought in on this project thinking it was him. And this is when we realized we had to like find something to prevent that. So we essentially upgraded by saying we, I mean I, upgrading the contracts and made a new version where anyone who is like whitelisted sort of can block a project from being mintable essentially. So I was the only one moderating back then. And this also shows like the kind of compromise you have to make with like the reality versus the ideals, because in a perfect idealistic world you will put some kind of voting system that allows, I don't know, like the active community to maybe vote and eventually like block some project from being mintable because they reported it. But this kind of system is in practice not super effective because you need to decide what's going to be the threshold. It needs to be low enough so that people can block it in time, but it needs to be high enough so that no one has the ability to block it by themselves. And so along the journey of the platform, we have to make all of these choices about, practicality and staying true like to the original ethos of the platform. So for a while I was the only one to moderate with a report system, and then we got some moderators in the team, and the whole team was active, like looking through the projects, trying to look to what wasn't following the guidelines we put in place. But it was tough to specify, because where do you draw the line on what's acceptable and what's not when you're open? If it's hard because copy minting is obvious, but when does copy minting stops? Like if you change 5% of the code, is it still copy minting? If you keep 5%, so if you change 95, is it still copy minting? Some will argue yes, some will argue no, right? And as the platform, we had to sometimes take some seemingly arbitrary decision on, hey, this is like too close to the original material. It's obvious that, it's been like just edited for a quick buck. But there were many of these places, like this is on the code itself, but you also have, I don't know, flirting with only image PFP randomized with like 5 lines of code, stuff like that. So there's many places where it's super tricky to put these rules in place.
And on one side, someone could look at it and say, oh, these guys are so bad because there's just one guy blacklisting someone. This is not open and decentralized. But on the other side, you have collectors who could like waste their money because they're thinking they're buying great work from Peter, but they end up buying someone else. And you are, I assume, like dealing with all this kind of hyper scaling energy of like having an ecosystem which is a little bit crazy. And you can't make perfect decisions, but you have to make good decisions very fast. So I hope it shows what you just shared, that it must be very difficult to deal with these situations multiple times a day on different topics, that in retrospect, we can always do differently. But when you are in the heat of the moment, you have to take decisions, a lot of them every day, and go fast. So congratulations for everything you've built. And also you're still here today. Because fast forward 2025, let's say just 4 years later, quite a lot happened. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of marketplaces and platforms during these 4 years. And seeing you and the team still being here today means a lot to me as an artist, but also as a whole for the community. I'm sure everyone is very respectful about that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's been very hard, and I can really clearly understand why platforms, opened and closed, because in the craziness of 2021, like there were like huge revenue streams coming in. So first of all, as an outsider, when you see this, you think, oh, there is like an opportunity to build an idea that I have in this space because it seems to be financially sustainable. I mean, viable, not sustainable yet, but so, lots of people saw the financial opportunity and decided to go in expecting like some returns, right? But as like the market started to dry, lots of these projects that launched a little bit too late for the initial frenzy were never capable of, sustaining themselves, at least not as they anticipated it. Also, for those that launched before, it's also super difficult to handle as a business because you grow super fast in 3, 4, 5 months, and then from there, it's going down. So you have like, if you take wrong decisions in these 4 or 5 months, like if you expand the team thinking that this is gonna keep growing and, suddenly it dries up and you don't, take the appropriate decision in scaling down the team thinking it's gonna get up again, then you can also burn cash really quickly. And to some extent it also happened to us, right? Because I've never been spending a lot of money in my life. So when we started to make a lot of money, I was like really extra cautious about spending. But as we, had a slightly bigger treasury to afford hiring people, then, I brought some people in, but then the markets dried. So what I described before happened to us essentially. So
And
thankfully we were...
if I may ask, before we will talk about art just in a few minutes, for me, a burning question is, for a founder in the crypto ecosystem, on top of like the difficulties you just mentioned, which is scaling very fast, but also potentially having to face like a downturn, quite abrupt. On top of this, your treasury is potentially denominated in crypto.
Yeah.
And you accumulate because maybe the revenues go down, but on the top of this, your treasury might kind of lose 50% of its value in a week. I mean, do you have any advice, or have you listened to like an astute financier somewhere about how to manage crypto treasury as a crypto startup?
So let's put it that way. I was an absolute... I don't have a word for it, but I was really stupid when financially wise, when I launched the platform. So we had got like a lot of fees from the contracts, up to a point where there was like maybe 500, like I think it was up to 800,000 in terms of Tezos in the treasury. And I didn't know a lot about money. Like actually I didn't know nothing then about money, like only the very basics. And I didn't think much about the future, like essentially like getting some of it in fiat, putting into USDC, like, essentially diversifying. So the big mistake I made was to essentially keep a lot of it in Tezos, and as Tezos started to go down, we lost a lot of treasury through that. So that's also when I and some of the people in the team started to learn and look into what we should be doing with the treasury. But it was already a bit late when we started to look into it, because everything happens really fast. Like in 1 week sometimes in one day you lose 30% of the value, which is absolutely insane when you think about it for a company. So I will say, if I had to do it, if I was doing this again, I would be much more careful about securing some of it in terms of fiat to have more sustainability for the company, because you pay employees in fiat. So if the price of the crypto goes down, you can't say, hey, I can't pay you because the crypto is down, right? You have to essentially sell at a loss. But yeah, I would recommend to diversify at least in some stable coin or in fiat, and potentially Bitcoin, which nowadays is a little bit more stable than the other crypto.
Were you able to get some advice from a professional, from one of your investors or something like this? Or where do you get or you just like are doing the basic finance diversification stuff?
So yeah, once we raised money, we got some advice from our investors, like some basis. And then we chatted with some company that's basically doing this for us now. Well, that has been doing the basics for us essentially. Like they are not managing any kind of portfolio, like just securing the treasury essentially.
And something I wanted to ask you also related to this, funny that Echo had this question, is do you look around sometimes outside of art and NFTs in the crypto space? How are other startups doing, or do you like other sort of genres, like let's say prediction markets or some sort of DeFi or social? Like there was this different social platforms that were trendy for a while, but I think they don't really work. They stopped being trendy right now. Do you have any other interests like this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in projects that have a social impact in gathering people together. So while Farcaster will be one of these examples, right? I was really intrigued by the protocol, what it enables, and really interested to see where it's gonna be, where it's leading. I haven't looked, but I think the base app is using Farcaster under the hood, but I'd have to double check, but I'm assuming it does, which is like proves that the protocol is interesting. When it comes to DeFi, not so much. So I've looked into the different versions of the Uniswap protocol just for understanding like the very basics. So I'm quite versed in terms of Uniswap, but other like more sophisticated protocol, I'm not so familiar with it. So I have sort of the basis of DeFi. Yeah, and I mean, not outside of that, I'm not so much into crypto projects, except maybe like security findings and solidity research. So this is something that I just find interesting, like seeing people look at what can be done with the blockchain stack on EVM. There's some really cool and creative ways of exploiting what's been there since the beginning in new ways. And maybe the ordinals. I was interested in ordinals, which I found also, it also fits in this wave of, repurposing existing layers of blockchains for new purposes. And well, the ordinals protocol was that. And I found like the history behind it, being able to isolate each individual Satoshi. It was like it's pretty interesting. But I haven't been following the advances on the ordinals protocol lately. But I will say anything that's technically creative, I find interesting.
One thing fascinating is that since 2021 and facing all these like big ups and some downs, you've built and improved and developed Fxhash in like a very unique way. You recently announced the protocol and a bunch of new features. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Like, what does it mean for artists and what could that mean for collectors?
Yeah. So this comes from the observation of the space and its evolution over the last 2-3 years. So over these last 2 years, we've built around the same initial principles behind NFTs, which is you publish some NFT release that has a sale that happens once or a little bit over time, and this is denominated in crypto, in the native crypto. So essentially it's sort of a fiat payment that you make to get the NFT, and then you can trade it on the secondary market. The collection may get a lot of traction and secondary become bigger. And the initial premises of this for artists was, first of all, on the primary market you can generate some amount of money that's pretty much fixed, right? Minus if you're using auctions, but roughly fixed. And then you're gonna get paid on the secondary market with royalties over time. And while it was working a little bit, well, quite a lot for some artists in the early days, when the market started to, we realized that this wasn't working anymore and wasn't sustainable anymore. First of all, for artists, like we saw less and less artists, even great ones, not capable of generating revenues because they maybe weren't able, to navigate play the social game on crypto. So being able to reach out to collectors, to build a strong collector base. Like some artists struggle a bit with that, even though they're really talented, like from an artistic standpoint. But a good system should be capable of rewarding those artists as much as those that can, build a collector base. And so we started to think about alternatives, and this is when we saw like Pump.Fun on one end, but also, and more interestingly, Virtuals on another end, which had this like big financial markets built around the coin speculation, essentially. And these ecosystems were thriving, and so we started to think, well, okay, we don't like these models, it's maybe not suited for art, but maybe we can draw some inspiration from it and bring this into our ecosystem because it's working and also it's accruing value over time, and the projects that are working, create lots of value for all the participants over time. Like there is a, coin that you can look into for the accrued value over time for a project, which is quite interesting for investors. And I started to think about how can we bring this into our platform in a way that would make sense for the artistic space. So there was nothing in place then, it was just like randomly thinking about the idea. But that's when I started to talk with the team about all of this, and we started to tinker about what could it be, how could we put it in place, that it started to sort of make sense, this principle of having an artist releasing a coin in their name through which they route all of their projects seemed to be a much more sustainable path financially, because have some kind of very liquid vehicle that investors can tap into for investing into you, but also for consuming your art. So there we can create some kind of, I don't like the term flywheel, but some kind, of a feedback loop of, activity on the art that accrues value on the coin itself. And so that's, interestingly, that's also when other platforms, notably Zora, thought around the same idea. We have like pretty close designs, which in a way reassures me because when they released their protocol, I was like, oh wait, this is actually so close to what we are building and have almost finished building right now. So it was reassuring to see that others like observed the coin space and realized there was a way to translate some of its dynamics into the artistic space. So that's roughly how we started to build around this coin idea. And there's still a bit of work, right, in repackaging the product on the UX side of things, making it a bit simpler. But we've seen the first signs of this protocol being much more sustainable for us on one end. And though that we don't yet have like the immediate benefits for the artists that have participated, there's no foundations for them to create a lot of value for themselves over time through their coin, which is something that didn't exist before. Like, for instance, if we take my coin as an example, there's 10% of the supply of the coin that's been burned for minting my first project. And the project will always be there, so it can keep burning the coin as people keep collecting it. But over time, I'm gonna release more and more projects on my coin. And so potentially it's gonna, well, not potentially, eventually it's gonna keep shrinking the supply more and more, which is gonna create scarcity and will give me a way to sell it sensibly over time to finance my artistic practice. So as I'm doing a new release, I may sell like 1-2% of what I own of the coin. So we find this to be, new ways for artists to create lots of value for themselves over time, as long as they are committed to their craft and to, creating this, I was talking about a collector base. If some artists struggle a little bit with keeping a collector base active, the coin is sort of an envelope, a tool that allows them to basically automatically build this collector base that's gonna basically use the coin as a catalyst for regrouping.
So as an artist, so pretty much every artist can decide to have like a token emission as an artist, but are you obliged to do so to mint on Fxhash, or is it just something that you can opt out if you want?
No, so the way we built OpenForm, which is like something we can also talk about, it's a sort of new kind of generative art. We needed some way of essentially locking value, releasing value, and the coins were like super interesting financially to build into this protocol. So that's why we required artists that are launching an OpenForm project release a coin alongside it, because it makes a lot of sense financially for them as time will go by. That being said, we are gonna be reopening the full stack for everyone without necessarily having to launch a coin. I still think, it can be really valuable for artists to do so, but I understand that some will just not want to do that for various reasons, which are totally understandable. And so it's not our role as a platform to essentially block them because of this system we put in place kind of goes against our initial idea.
Of course, and that might be also a very stupid question, but is it legal for an artist to create a token? Could it be assimilated to securities or?
Yeah, so it's gonna depend on every country, of course. We've like released a legal document that we share with all of the artists that gives like the baseline for most countries, like where most of our users are about it, and the short answer is no, but the long answer is of course to look case by case. But one of the most important points is that the artists are not selling their coin initially as it goes through a bonding curve, and this is what alleviates the classification of this this.
Great, and this is an object. I'm really playing devil's advocate because as an artist, that would be the kind of question I would ask myself, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So it's great to see that you have prepared and anticipated this question. You have some documentation available, which are not going to replace legal advice, but you have prepared a framework so every artist can investigate and say, okay, this is where I'm starting from. And with this bonding curve as the intermediary, this is definitely the mechanism which is used in many different scenarios to make this an action you can take. You mentioned about the open forms. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about this beyond the token aspect?
Yes, of course. I mean, open form is my little baby that I'm quite. Yeah, it's. So as we were building like this protocol, we wanted to release some also new feature artistically that could be paired alongside coins in a way that makes sense. And I started to make my project with the idea of re-rolling. So, you can mint an edition of an NFT, but if you don't like it, you are allowed to re-roll and you get a new one. And so I was building my project Generations with like this idea of some organisms have some DNA and then you re-roll their DNA. And then it occurred to me that I would rather want to evolve them than completely re-roll them because, I was interested in the idea of creating the algorithm, but in a way that's much open-ended. You still click on mint, you click on evolve, and you get like something that resembles the parent. And I find this interesting on an artistic standpoint. And so that's when I had decided that I came back to our team and said, wait, we should totally build something around that because it's so interesting. And so I started to think about what it could be in terms of a framework because, sometimes you have these ideas for yourself. But also what's interesting when you're building a platform is to start thinking about all of these ideas that I have for me, how can I abstract them into something that's general? How can I generalize them into something that can be used by everyone? And so that's how we built OpenForm essentially. From a need for myself to something blueprint that can be used by many artists to explore generative art in new ways. And for those that are not super familiar, the idea is long-form generative art. You mint, you get a random seed, and that's paired with the algorithm to create a unique output. With OpenForm, we extend this definition by allowing you to evolve an iteration of a generative art collection. So by evolving it, you take its seed and you create a new one, and now the evolution has the list of all the seeds of its lineage. So if you evolve it once more, you get the seed of the parent of the parent, the seed of the parent, and your seed. The idea of this is that, instead of maybe mutating the hash, the seed, changing some of the characters, slightly mutating the number, instead it offers an open framework for artists to leverage randomness and evolution in a way that's up to them. So now you have this ability, you can use some properties of the grandparent of a project, of an iteration, or you can just not use them if you want. You have the liberty to decide to which extent you rely on the lineage of an iteration to define its features.
Okay, yeah, that's it's fascinating, and I love that you experiment with a lot of potentially controversial takes, because this is how I think you can make the practice progress. It can be controversial to re-roll an output, let's say, from an artistic standpoint, but also it can be great. So depending on where you stand, and we can have this debate, and you build the tools to let people decide pretty much what they want to do. So that's it's fascinating. And beyond the protocol, you announced recently that you were like, I don't know the exact wording, and you clarified that, but you would be like transitioning from supporting Tezos, you would be transitioning more toward the blockchain base. I would like to ask you, what does it mean for the artists who minted on Tezos? What does it mean for the collectors who minted on Tezos? I mean, what does it mean for the future? Why is this decision?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that if there was a way for us to be sustainable solely using Tezos, we'd probably do so, because I still think, Tezos has some virtues in the way it's designed. But the reality of things is that it's hard to scale on Tezos, it's hard to reach out to new audiences of users. It's generally like such a different stack as well, that everything we almost have to build from scratch on Tezos. We can't leverage the EVM ecosystem, but that's not even the main thing. Like, maybe something we haven't been transparent enough about is like what it means to run a company of our scale on Tezos and how much we make through it over the years. This week we'll actually be sharing these numbers with people so that they can understand the decision making behind this. As sad as it is, like, the reality is that we couldn't sustain ourselves anymore on Tezos. And so, as we started to build on Ethereum, and as we started to look at what the future could be for a sustainable FX, and when this token and altcoin design came to friction, sadly, there isn't any DeFi ecosystem on Tezos. There was an... Oh, you need to
Sorry.
answer?
No, definitely
No.
not. Sorry.
Okay.
The DeFi ecosystem on Tezos, I believe though that they also announced some kind of commodity-based DeFi thing. I can't remember exactly, but I was like, oh, we're losing Fxhash, and now we have like uranium trading available on Tezos.
I mean, to be fair, like, I respect them for trying to expand, because I still believe that the lack of a good DeFi ecosystem is what translated into us not being capable of tapping into like higher volumes, we were always kind of limited by the chain we were on. And I mean, I'm more than, I respect the community so much, and I enjoyed the people that I've met so much, and the memories we created so much, and nothing will ever be able to replace that. But the reality is that if we want FX to keep existing in like 10 years, we need to find other ways that can be more sustainable. And in a month, we've already like done essentially more than what we did in a year on Tezos, right? Just because we have a token on some DeFi, on a blockchain where DeFi is much more active. So yeah, the reality, it's hard, right? Like, we have no path toward sustainability, something which was only possible through funding from the Tezos Foundation, which I've always been, I didn't really want to go down that path. They really helped us in times where we need it, not to an insane extent, right? They didn't fund us in any way, like they helped us at one point financially, but that was part of the raise. They were in the equity deal, so it wasn't like completely free either, but they also helped us throughout the journey. So I think it was a great partner, but sadly, like, for sustainability and independence from any kind of central organism, we had to look into other opportunities. So base isn't perfect, is, as I said before, like, there's like a few checkboxes that it doesn't tick in what we were looking for, but also it was offering much more than what we could have had on Tezos, like path towards onboarding new users, being featured on the base app, being featured on Coinbase, having access to their user base. It was like a much sounder initiative, right, than staying somewhere where we didn't see any realistic turn in the right direction for 2-3 years.
Okay, and but also it means that this is a decision you took right now, but also maybe why not? Because Tezos is doing a lot of great things. I mean, to support artists, and now I think they moved a little bit toward DeFi. Maybe in a few years, you can also reconnect. You have to kind of survive, if I understand correctly. So it's a difficult decision you had to make. So you keep supporting the old collections, because I think this is important that, yeah, if someone collected works on Tezos through Fxhash since 2021, their work will still show up on your platform. Please stop me if I'm wrong, but this is the way I understand it.
This is correct, yes.
So you don't run away from things. You are here you kind of make a decision, difficult one to sustain for the long term your platform. You keep the existing works. So the collectors, nothing is changing for them. The artist, it's not like you're running away and you're pulling the plug and everything is disappearing. So everything is made in good standing. You have to go in a different direction for the moment, but I mean, who knows? At some point, there might be a reconnection with Tezos, and we never know. I mean, I guess it's an optionality from what I understand.
Oh yes, totally, and maybe that's something that wasn't super clear with the noise that were on socials recently. Like there was this kind of feeling we were completely leaving Tezos. Also, like some artists may have, said things that weren't completely true in what we wanted to do. In a way, we are like completely removing support for Tezos. Like essentially what we are doing is focusing new features on base, essentially. With any new set of features will be focusing on base, and we wanted to remove some of the maintenance we have to do by disabling the option to release new projects on Tezos for some period of time. So it's not us completely giving up on Tezos, it's us like essentially focusing for a while on something else while maintaining the existing body of work that exists on Tezos, because it's our culture, it's our legacy. I mean, it didn't even cross my mind at any point that we would be, removing support for Tezos completely. Like, there's absolutely no way around it. But it's true, that we have to adapt to the reality, and so we decided to focus new features on base. But as you said, I don't know, maybe in a year it will be much sounder for us. I don't know, even like if we are capable of funding our Tezos support from other activities on another blockchain, we will gladly do so, because there is some love between the platform and Tezos. It sounded like there wasn't, but it's been like extremely painful to take this decision, as I mentioned before.
And maybe to highlight also, because sometimes people don't think about that, but maintaining code and a system, it's not because you wrote the features and that it's working that you say, oh, now it's working, I'm not touching it anymore. I mean, maintaining a system is extremely expensive in human resources, in capital, and it's also an opportunity cost of not building something else. That's what I wanted to highlight, is because it's not because you just have something which works that it doesn't require work to maintain.
Yeah, exactly, and I think you know it very well, right? But it's sometimes, yeah, people think it runs, so why close it if it was working? I don't know. To give you like maybe some insights on what happens, Tezos goes into a protocol upgrade every few months. So it sometimes results into an upgrade of the wallet clients that we are using, so the wallet packages. Sometimes you have security findings that you need to patch, otherwise, your product then becomes vulnerable. So you need to keep upgrading the packages that are related to the blockchain that are being used. And it's not like a one-line command that you run, because it often cascades into lots of mini issues that you have to fix throughout the whole stack that you have. Not to mention the indexers, them crashing, or a third party that's changing their APIs. There's so many different components that you have to keep maintaining, and we'll keep maintaining those for essentially collecting on the secondary market, because this is something we want to keep preserving there. But also, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. And yeah, for me, it always felt like the love for Tezos is not going away. Absolutely not. It's just, survival decision. Might be temporary. It might bring new collectors into the Tezos ecosystem as well, because as you mentioned, you can still trade on secondary and vice versa. So yeah, we see how things evolve, but making difficult decisions is never easy by definition. But you can take a lot of stuff for that. Congrats for doing things and not hiding yourself, not doing anything and just dying, hiding somewhere. So I think, big kudos for that.
Thanks. There's so much cool stuff that I have in mind still for GenArt that blockchain only can enable, and